This evening, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to pick up where we left off. We were discussing some of the issues pertaining to impurity, getting on the body, clothing, or the place in prayer. And before we move on to the next condition or prerequisite of prayer, Imam al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَلَا تَصِحُ صَلَاةٌ فِي مَقْبَرَةٍ وَحَمَّامٍ وَعَطَنِ إِبِلٍ وَحُشٍ وَمَجْزَرَةٍ وَمَزْبَلَةٍ وَقَارِعَةِ طَرِيقٍ وَاصْطِحَطِهَا وَمَغْصُوبٍ وَتُكْرَهُ إِلَيْهَا. So in this section here, this is actually an entire different section which discusses areas or places in which prayer is not valid, and also discusses areas in which prayer is valid or recommended, depending on what type of prayer that is. So he begins with this first section here, وَلَا تَصِحُ صَلَاةٌ, that prayer is invalid, be it obligatory or voluntary. And this, of course, is without a legal excuse. And a legal excuse would be like confinement in these locations. So he's going to mention a number of them. So these are invalid in the following locations. And he ends this, he says, وَتُكْرَهُ إِلَيْهَا, which also is disliked to pray toward these areas unless there's a barrier between you and these locations. And a barrier could be like a wall or something. It could even be a temporary barrier that's put up. So long as there's a barrier, if there's a barrier, then that disliked nature no longer applies. So we'll go through these one at a time. The first is, he says, maqbara, which is the graveyard. And the exception for this, besides a legal excuse, the legal excuse is applied to all of these places. But there is an exception for the graveyard, and that is to perform the funeral prayer. You can make a janazah prayer in the graveyard even before the burial has concluded, meaning that the body is still outside of on the ground. And the prohibition to pray in the graveyard includes both new graveyards and old graveyards, even if the contents of the graves has totally expired, meaning there's nothing left, completely returned to the earth. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, do not take the graves as a masjid. I prohibit you from doing so. This is found Sahih Muslim. Do not take the graves as a masjid. So in general, whether they're new graves or old graves. Side note here is that two graves do not constitute a graveyard. According to the madhab, there must be 3 graves or more in an area which is designated to bury the deceased. And this also excludes any deceased that are buried at your home, regardless if it's 1, 2, 3, or more, because burying someone at your home, this is not considered a graveyard. It's also permissible to pray in a place which has been designated as a graveyard, but has yet to be populated. So in the instance that there was an area of land allotted for the graveyard, but there were no graves there yet, then it's permissible to pray, and it's valid if there is a prayer performed there. It's another note on masjids and graveyards. This is something that you may come across. Masjids and graveyards, when you combine those things, you mix those things together. There's 3 different cases. The first is if a masjid is built in an existing graveyard. Okay, there's a graveyard, you come and build a masjid there inside of the graveyard. It's like praying in the graveyard, and therefore the prayer is invalid, unless it's janazah prayer. The second one is if a graveyard is established around or in front of the masjid. This case is like praying in the direction of the graveyard, and therefore it is disliked unless there's a barrier, like the masjid wall. So in the event that there was a masjid and then the graveyard was allocated right around the building, if you're praying in the direction, obviously the qibla in front, then as long as there's a wall there, then it's not disliked. Number 3, the last case is if the masjid and graveyard were built or established together, which is not permitted to do so, and the prayer is not valid, and it cannot be given as an endowment. You cannot make this a waqf because it's impermissible in the first place. So that's number 1, the graveyard. The second thing is the bathhouse. And this is like hammam, which could be public bathhouse. And this includes the inside, meaning prayer is invalid inside. It includes the outside. It includes whatever would be given during the sale of that bathhouse, because all of that is called hammam, and so all of it is included in the ruling. And this is based on a hadith which states that the entire earth has been designated for me as a place of prayer except for the graveyard and the bathhouse. So this hadith also supports number 1, the graveyard, as well as this number 2, the bathhouse. This is collected by Imam Ahmad, Abu Dawood, at-Tirmidhi, and others. The next place is a camel pen. That's the way it's been translated, the camel pen, which is like the enclosure that the camels go to rest or are held. This prohibition is based on a hadith which states, pray in the sheep pen, but do not pray where the camel sits. It's collected by Imam Ahmad, Abu Dawood. And it doesn't matter if the place, this camel pen is free of impurity, and there's no najasa there, that doesn't impact the ruling, it's still invalid. Or the camel pen is free of camels at that time. The camels are just not there, they're out grazing. It's still the camel pen, and so it still is a place in which prayer is prohibited. The prohibition here does not include the area in which the camels sit or rest when they're traveling, or the area which they eat or drink. We'll get to understand in a little bit the specific nature of these things. The next thing is the restroom. And this is what Imam al-Bahuti said was, the word that he used is hushin. And there's a number of words that have been used to describe the restroom. It's basically the toilet. Over time, first they called it al-bustan, and this is where they used to go and answer the call of nature. That's what they call it, bustan. And then they called it khala, or something of that nature. It is, however, the restroom, the toilet, and this ruling applies even if it is free of impurity, like many of the restrooms today, where there's no trace of impurity after it's been flushed or cleaned. This includes everything inside its door. The location of the toilet and other places inside, they're all the same because they're all included in the general understanding of the name which that location holds. So the restroom may have the toilet, there may be some seating area, or maybe very elaborate. So long as that area behind that door is called the toilet or the restroom, it is impermissible to pray there. And this is based on the prohibition of speaking and remembering Allah in such places. And because that was prohibited, speaking and remembering Allah, then performing prayer is even more so. The next location is a butchery, and this is the place allotted for slaughtering animals. After that is the dump. It's a place allotted for trash, even if the trash is free of impurity. The next one is the middle of the path, middle of the roadway. This is frequented by travelers, even if there's no one traversing it, unless a person's riding on their animal, or they're underway and they're praying, for example, a voluntary prayer. Or small neighborhood roads, they're fine. It's fine to pray in small neighborhood roads, or to pray on the raised areas along the sides of the roads, like the embankments or the sidewalks. Those areas are fine to pray on, otherwise it would be invalid in the middle of the pathway. The exception to this is the janazah prayer, Jummah prayer, Eid prayer, etc., like Salat al-Istisqa or Kusuf, the rain prayer or prayers for eclipse, basically congregational prayers. They would be valid if prayed on the road if there was a dire need, like the masjid was too small, and so the congregation flowed out of the masjid onto the road. And this is something that is quite common when you have a large community. Prayer is also impermissible on their roof, as he mentioned, on the roof of the above mentioned places. Okay? Because the air above whatever thing you're talking about, the space above that takes the same ruling as the ground beneath it. It takes the same ruling. And in other works, they talk about the impermissibility of praying in the middle of a river. It's not a place of prayer to go into a river. And so the space above that's included, which means that you wouldn't pray on a bridge. Of any of these places that I mentioned, or that the Imam mentions here, were constructed under a masjid, such that the masjid was now above, and now we're talking about the same principle of the space above something, the prayer would still be valid, because the masjid was there first, and then this happened later. So it would not have an impact on the masjid that was there initially. Lastly, he mentions usurped property or location, which also has the same exceptions as mentioned above, like Salat al-Jum'ah, Salat al-Eid, Istisqa, etc. You can end up praying on forcefully taken land. Otherwise, it would be invalid to pray in such a location. The prohibition of prayer in these locations is purely devotional. It's something that's known as ta'abbudi, purely devotional. So there's no real rhyme, no reason as to why they are locations in which prayer is invalid or prohibited. You cannot come up with some type of reason like, well, there's filth there, or it's dangerous, or it's etc. There's no real way, according to the madhab, to determine the causality of their prohibited nature. They have been mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith. It's related by Ibn Umar. Prohibited prayer in 7 places: a dump, a butchery, a graveyard, the middle of the road, the bathhouse, a camel pen, and on top of the house of Allah. This is reported by Ibn Majah and Tirmidhi. If any of these places was converted to something else, such that it was changed enough so that the name of it changed, and those things were removed to the point that, for example, you took a bathhouse and converted it into a home, the ruling would change along with it. So the ruling would now be, can you pray in this new structure? And then we would tackle that as it came. Goes on and he says, وَلَا تَصِحُّ فَرِيضَةٌ فِي الْكَعْبَةِ وَلَا عَلَى ظَهْرِهَا. This goes back to that hadith, that it's not valid to pray an obligatory prayer in the Kaaba or on the Kaaba. He says, وَالْحِجْرِ مِنْهَا وَتُسَنُّ النَّافِلَةُ فِيهِمَا. Though a supererogatory prayer is. He's including the Hijra as well. The Hijra, which is that little enclosed kind of circle, half circle, if you will, right next to the Kaaba. That part is also included in this ruling, that it's not permitted to pray an obligatory prayer inside of the Hijr. This is based on the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah. This is verse number 144. And this is what means, and wherever you are, turn your faces towards this direction. Turn your faces towards this direction. The direction here is the shatr. Shatr means the direction. So if you're standing inside, then you're surrounded by it, the Kaaba, and that means you can't face its direction. You're inside of it. That's the basic principle here, the concept here. It is, however, valid to stand such that none of it is behind the one praying, but you're at what's called al-muntaha, right? It's kind of like right on the, like if there's a door You're standing right there where the wall would be, or right just outside of it on its like framing of sorts, such that you now are facing it. You're not inside of it, you're just outside of it while standing. Even if you were to bow and prostrate into it, the prayer would be valid because you are facing the Kaaba and you're not being surrounded by it. The walls are of no significance here because the intent is to face the location. It's because it would still be faced without the presence of its walls. So if the Kaaba were taken down, if the walls of it were removed, our prayer direction would be the same. We would face that location and not the actual structure itself. Voluntary prayers are recommended, and oath prayers are valid inside and on top of the Kaaba, so long as one does not make sujood on its border. And that's what I was trying to get at earlier, standing on the border of it. So if you're inside and you make sujood on its border, then that means now you're totally facing, your part of you is totally outside, facing in a total different direction. It's based on a hadith which states that someone came to Ibn Umar. They said that Allah's Messenger entered the Kaaba. Ibn Umar, he said, I went there, but the Prophet ﷺ had come out of the Kaaba and I found that Bilal was standing between its two doors. I asked Bilal radiallahu anhu, did the Prophet ﷺ pray in the Kaaba? And Bilal replied, yes. He prayed 2 rak'ahs between the two pillars which are to the left upon entering the Kaaba. And then Allah's Messenger ﷺ came out and offered a 2 rak'ah prayer facing the Kaaba. This hadith is found Sahih Bukhari Muslim. Okay, so this hadith is reported by Imam Bukhari Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ prayed rak'atayn inside of the Kaaba. It should be noted that there's another hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas which states that he did not pray inside of the Kaaba. And what that means is that there were 2 times that he entered the Kaaba, one in which he prayed and one in which he did not pray. In the event that there seems to be some dispute or contradiction, then obviously there is an understanding that has to be applied here to reconcile between these 2 narrations. Again, to emphasize the point, the Hijra is the same because it's considered part of the Kaaba. It's part of the structure that was not rebuilt, but it was marked. They did not conclude its construction on the original foundations of Ibrahim, but the Hijra which was a part of that. Hijra was included in that. A last note here, it's permissible to enter churches and synagogues that have no images and to pray in them if they are clean, they have no impurity. It's based on the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the earth has been made a means of purification and a place of prayer for me. It's very general, it includes everything. It is disliked if they contain pictures, and this is based on a hadith which states the angels do not enter a home which contains images. It's disliked. Some have said it's impermissible because of this. So the angels don't enter to a home that has pictures in it. So some have said it's impermissible. However, because the Prophet ﷺ prayed in the Kaaba when it contained images, coupled with the very general instruction found in the hadith which states, pray wherever you are when the time enters, for that place is a masjid. This hadith is muttafaqun alayh. And when we combine all of those things together, the official position is, as mentioned above, it's permissible if there's no images and disliked if there is. So the prayer would be valid in such places. There's a lot more that can be said about this. However, we'll stop here. And when we pick up the next time, we'll move on to the next condition, which is istiqbal al-qibla.